I'm really excited to kick it over to our panel here. So we're going to talk about how investing in AI, the connection between these workflows, these high-performance architectures, and the critical facilities necessary, both from a company perspective, and we'll get into a little bit of even probably the geopolitical elements of this as it plays into the development of these models and the sovereignty of them. So with that, I'm going to welcome to the stage Joe Dominguez. Everyone, welcome Joe. Joe is the CEO of Constellation Energy and been in and around the energy market for a while. Yeah, thank you for being here.
Where do you want me?
So you're going to go right here.
All right.
Thank you, Joe. Jeff Holzschuh. Jeff, welcome. Jeff is the chairman of Morgan Stanley's Institutional Securities Group and a member of the firm's management committee. Also a pretty good golfer. Hi, Jeff. How are you? And Aidan Kehoe. Welcome, Aidan. Aidan is a managing partner at Nadia Partners, a venture capital firm focused on delivering all of this stuff from AI to energy, data center space to you as customers. So welcome, panel. I thought we could start here. Joe, if you would. Fascinating dinner last night. Really enjoyed the perspectives that you shared with the group. Thank you for making time to do that. I don't know that everyone out there really understands from a scale perspective what we're talking about when we talk about AI workloads. From the little computer to how these things get stacked up together. Could you give us some context on the demands you see AI creating as compared to maybe what you've seen in your history of the energy markets at large?
Yeah, sure. Well, good morning, everyone. And look, I did notice you changed your shirt, which presumably underwear too, so we're all kind of quite relieved about that.
Now it's a party.
Yeah, you know, I, like many folks in the energy business, listened to some of Jensen's speeches before last night and walked away understanding probably 60% of what he was talking about when he got into flops and all the words that many of you are far more familiar with than I am. And so I suspect when you think about the energy business, it's kind of the same thing, Mike. Yeah. It's how big is what we're talking about relative to other things. So let me start off with our company. We are the largest publicly traded company that owns nuclear plants. We own, relatively speaking, about 25% to a third of the U.S. nuclear plants. We operate purely in competitive markets. About 11% of the carbon-free energy that goes into the country comes from us. And if you want to kind of subcategorize that a bit more, and you think about the carbon-free energy that's dispatchable, i.e. is not dependent on the sun being out or the wind blowing, but we can control it, it's about 26%. And to just give you a number, that in the aggregate is about 25 gigawatts. So when Jensen was up here last night talking about training data centers that are in the neighborhood of 20 gigawatts, what you're talking about is, relatively speaking, taking a quarter to a third of the U.S.'s entire nuclear fleet, 26% of its dispatchable clean energy, and doing one thing with it, and that's powering a training center. So this is kind of, the enormity it should be quite apparent. For us, big customers historically throughout the arc of my career might have been refineries that are 75 megawatts. Big electric arc steel furnaces were big time customers. Car factories, we're talking things that are slightly over 100, maybe 100 to 200 megawatts, okay? So when we're talking about something that's 20,000 megawatts, it's of course something we've never seen before, let alone, 10,000 megawatts or 5,000 megawatts or anything like that. The entire peninsula here, from Tijuana down to Cabo, uses about 3,500 megawatts during peak demand. That's about half of what, the third or fourth largest city in the US would be. So we're trying to accumulate that much energy. So what it's creating is a discussion around scarcity in really three different ways. Scarcity, do we have the megawatts to do this? What does it mean about electric reliability? What does it mean about consumer supply-demand fundamentals? And that's triggering a reaction among regulators. What does it mean about the clean energy journey, right? We're on the 11th summer in a row that's been the hottest in recorded history. We're seeing parts of the US devastated by storms to a point where insurance is unattainable. So that climate crisis is not going anywhere. So where do we find the clean energy, not just the regular energy? And thirdly, where in the heck are we going to put this stuff, Mike? You know, to your point earlier, this is of a size and scale that the system is not built to serve, right? This is taking 20 nuclear plants, if you were going to use Jensen's example, building them all around a data center. Imagine that. I mean, just imagine that for a country that has built 2 nuclear plants in the last 20 years. We announced the other day that we are restarting 3 Mile Island in partnership with Microsoft. That's an indicator, right, of the renewed interest in nuclear. But as I sit here today, we're not going to have a new nuclear plant built if we begin right now and decide to kick it off in 5 or 6 years. Some may say earlier, I'm not sure that's right. Carbon sequestration, so taking the carbon out of natural gas plants, very hard. Renewables with storage that allows them to operate 24/7, really hard. So the question is going to become, how willing are we going to be as a nation to take a step backwards on our climate journey in order to power this vital economy? All of those things are front and center in our business, the practicality of it, but the dimensions are like nothing I've seen in 3 decades of my career.
That's helpful, Joe. And I think, Jeff, just if you could provide some context here, we talked a little bit about if we know, or we all strongly feel that AI is an imperative, figuring out how does this, and over time we'll get to the kind of, does AI actually help solve some of the energy crisis that we have, and what can it bring there? But Jeff, as you think of markets, capital markets, and the interest in these answers, what are you seeing from a trends perspective there that maybe embolden us to say we can figure this out, or what paths we have to try to do that?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate you going first this morning, because anybody that's crazy enough to follow Jensen, deserves that.
No, you got to learn how to take a punch sometimes.
I went out this morning. I went out this morning to the store and tried to buy a leather jacket. So I did. It was the best I could do.
Hey, Jeff, they don't make them in my size.
I also just want to thank WWT for a great forum, hospitality, everything else. So
thank you for being here. Yeah.
Just to follow up on Joe, the magnitude of this from a capital formation perspective is incredible. So if you looked at, take some of Joe's numbers, nationwide, we've got the big consulting firms thinking we need to build something around 100 gigawatts of power. So for those of you that aren't power geeks, that's 1,000 megawatts 1,000 times. So it would basically double the size of the existing power plant in the country today. And if we do it, 50 data centers, just 50 in the US alone, we think cost around $650 billion. So you think about, that's going to be $250 billion of equity that needs to get raised or put to work in the next 5 years. So it's an incredible commitment of both, capital and hardware. And to Joe's point, there's only really 3 ways to do this from a perspective of, you either buy a facility that's already connected to the grid and has access to power, water, land, all the things Joe's talking about. And what we've seen so far in that regard is, those sites got gobbled up pretty quickly, and the transmission grids have been a constraint as it relates to allowing people to take power off the grid. It's just a political nightmare to say, I'm going to take this power off the grid, still charge my retail and commercial customers, but the beneficiary is the data center. That's probably the biggest political question this area will face in the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm sure Joe will address that as well. Second way to do it would be to have land around an existing power facility, be it nuclear, be it coal, be it gas, and then build a data center right on that site, and then transmit the power out. The third way, which we're coming around to think is probably going to be the most practical way, the quickest way to get it built is that we're going to have an island. So we're going to build a data center and a power plant at the same time on a site, probably no more than 2 hours from a metro use area. And, what do you need for that? You need probably 100 acres. You need 200 million gallons of water for a 50 megawatt plant. And you need some transmission, all of which are complicated. So why do I say all that? Because I think the supply chain issue for this is a huge challenge. If you go into the market today to buy electrical equipment, power equipment from Siemens or wherever you buy it from, a year ago, Joe may have some specifics, I would go in and say, I need a transformer. They'd say, okay, you can have it in a year. We walked in there 2 weeks ago and they said 3 years. So the time frame to get these built and online is a complete horse race. I grew up in an energy power, kind of a boring, sleepy little business, and now all of our interactions are with Meta, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. It's bizarre. And the power industry, the total market cap of all the stocks in power today is about $1.2 trillion. It's third the size of Microsoft or NVIDIA. So it's not all of this capital is being put on top of an industry that's a heck of a lot smaller from a capital perspective than the end user. It's hot. We can raise the money now, no doubt. But I think it's going to be the collaboration in energy and power to do all this stuff together, buy in bulk, safety, cyber, all the things we're talking about is going to be a different way for all these guys to use business. Joe's done an amazing job. We helped split this company away from a regulated electric utility 4 years ago. The market cap was of the combined company, Joe's business and the utility was $40 billion. The market cap today is $120 billion. So, and Joe's 80 of it. So it created the largest amount of wealth in this sector in the history of the sector. So kudos to Joe and his team. So with that, Mike, I hope that addressed a little bit of it.
Yeah, very helpful.
One other thing I'd say is, because it'll come up at some point, the whole environmental question has changed over the last handful of years. 5 years ago, you could not even think about continuing to operate a coal plant. You probably had a heck of a time siting a gas plant. Nuclear, we couldn't give away. 6-7 years ago, you could have bought a nuclear plant for nothing. It's now the most valuable asset in the space. And so as we go forward, renewables will continue to grow. By 2035, we expect renewables to be roughly half the supply. Gas will probably be 30 and nuclear will still be 20. And coal, of course, fossil will drop off. But that whole space has become an overlay on top of this as we see renewable growth. It gets more complicated because it's intermittent power. We need batteries, we need storage, we need 100% resiliency for these data centers to operate. And that's the other challenge that we're all trying to get our arms around.
Yeah, but so roughly the same percentages, but again, we've got to double. We've got it from a capacity
doubling
perspective.
the size, but the fossil drops out of the bottom, replaced by renewables.
Renewables, yeah. Very good, very good. And Aidan, I'd love your perspective as you think about you're doing this as a business, really. I mean, this is the hypothesis of where you're directing your capital, what you're building out. So maybe a little bit more on what you're doing, why you're doing it, and some of how you think about that.
We're doing it because I couldn't get a job anywhere else. So we just started working on it. It was like I applied to Worldwide. I don't know where my resume went, Jim, when I sent it in. But so just for some context, so what we do at my firm is we're really like a research company where we spend a long time working on what we think where constraints are going to be. And then Jeff, Mike Pascucci, he always used to say, find a business that even if you're terrible at it, you can still do well. And AI and energy, even if it's so easy, an Irish person could do well in that industry at the moment. So we started a number of years ago originating companies from scratch that could go from 0 to 1 to scale. And the reason we did is we had a thesis called The Big Squeeze. And what you're hearing both yesterday and today is the big squeeze happening in real time. And our businesses are focused on how value is going to accrue online and offline. So online, we've got 8 businesses in the application layer. And then offline, we have everything from a land company to a renewable company we've created from scratch to a data center company. And we've been busy, And I think one of the things that's a great opportunity that doesn't really get enough coverage is the community benefits that can get drawn if we're thoughtful about policy. So, as an example, we have a pretty big campus in Alberta, Canada. So it's a single site of like 2 gigawatts, followed by another gig on the same site. But what we're spending most of our time doing is working with the government to help themselves. So, and it's a tremendous opportunity. If you think about what Jensen talked about yesterday, how value is going to accrue into robotics manufacturing. When cloud happened, companies like Netflix got the benefit from power in Virginia. What's going to happen now is there's an opportunity for the communities where power is already coming from to get the AI infrastructure built in those same locations. So I think it's very hard to imagine a future when you're rooted in legacy technology from the past, which is why we only do things from scratch, and it allows us to move really, 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 really quickly. And I think we're in a situation now where the constraints are really real, but we've started to integrate our businesses where we have our AI companies come in, work with the energy businesses and how they future-proof. And then we have our origination ability where we actually have like the founders of the company go in and talk to farmers. So I think all the capital is trying to pour in, very large companies who are already constrained and it's difficult to move. I'm sure Joe spends his time like dealing with the most complicated problems from a regulatory perspective as well as a constraint for and his consumers. He has an obligation to the communities where he operates. So unless you're thinking about what's actually happening with the big squeeze and how the people can really benefit from it, I think it's going to be hard, but it presents like a great opportunity to reimagine what a world could look like if we're thoughtful about energy. And the climate doesn't give a shit what your strategy is. So the more companies we sit down with and say, we're going to do this, this, and this, yeah, but the climate's going to decide the speed we're moving at. So unless there's like an integrated approach to how we're thinking about rebuilding the infrastructure of AI, and I think, it's very interesting to talk to the hyperscalers. They talk about what's a tier 1 market and that's a tier 2 market. I don't even know what that means. I think we need to kind of take the shackles off how we used to think about solving these problems and use AI to start to not just invest in the systems and the power, but also in the people. So I think there's the gap between the people who have the knowledge and the ability. Like, it was interesting sitting here yesterday. Like I said to Jim earlier, I would say the people in this room are in the 0.00001% of knowledge. Everybody who's using ChatGPT on that curve is they think it's like a consumer app. But when you really have to sit down and convince people about what this potential is, they just don't know. Mm-hmm. So I think we have a huge information mismatch, and that, it's all fine to have an air game, but I bet you 90% of Joe's problems are on the ground. Like the consequences that he faces are on the ground. And so the reason there's so much pent-up capital is it's definitely an opportunity, but there's also nowhere for it to go yet. So our business is focused on originating companies from scratch that help solve some of these problems. Very mission-driven business.
Very good. And just going back to the mix of the energy supply piece and renewables increasing, the dependence on nuclear, you've made a big investment on nuclear in terms of the announcement with 3 Mile Island. Talk a little bit about, what are we depending on there, both from a policy and maybe a social stigma perspective for those things to scale. I think our conversations have been, we know nuclear needs to be a part of this, or at least it needs to be one of the critical answers here to help bridge that gap. You made a big bet. Maybe tell us a little bit about why, and then Aidan, maybe to your point there, a little bit about there's a human side of this too that has to be considered in terms of the brand of nuclear overall and some innovation that's helping to reduce the concerns there.
Yeah, Mike, I think, for the 100+ years of the electric business, we decide what kind of power source we're going to use based on the composition of the load or the demand that's on the system. So, data centers isn't the only thing we're doing, quite obviously. We're trying to electrify the transportation sector as a country. We're doing things in the industrial sector to electrify. Something we don't talk about often, but electric heat pumps have now reached a level of efficiency where they're better than gas-fired solutions, even in the Northeast and places that traditionally you wouldn't have thought about that. So, if you take a few of those things, electric heat pumps, you're not going to build a nuclear plant for an electric heat pump because it's a winter-only load, right? It's a peaking load, so you're going to try to figure out something that runs pretty well in the winter. It's probably not going to be solar because the radiance is well down, but something else. But in the case of the data economy, it's 24/7 load, right? They want to take energy the same way that nuclear plants produce energy. So the composition of the demand is going to drive the source. That's the interest in nuclear. And it kind of creates this fascinating issue. You know, we talk about scarcity and we talk about the lack of energy, but it's a bit of a sloppy concept. And perhaps I could draw an analogy. If you think about the hotel rooms that are here in Cabo, that might be a good analogy to the electric system. There are many, many times of the year that the hotels around here are quite empty. You have tons of capacity, right? Same thing for the electric system. So when we're talking about peaking problems from a capacity standpoint, we're really talking about a handful of hours of the year that we have to manage. It's not always. And you see this in your own residential electric bills. There are times where it's high, times where it's really low, and the times where it's low is consistent with low demand on the system and plenty of room for data economy stuff. So Mike, I think the investment is going to be in two areas. One is what's going to operate 24/7 to kind of continue to support the system. And remember, you know, you're walking into a system that's not perfect by any stretch. Texas, California, two biggest states in the country over the last 5 years, have had major electric reliability crises. PJM, which is the largest RTO, think about the grid from Chicago to New Jersey, that big region of the country, largest in the country, nearly lost the system on Christmas Eve 3 years ago. So we are, you know, in certain places, we got to be honest, we got our foot on a banana peel and a bar of soap, right? And it's getting tough those times of year. So the other resource that we might want to think about is what's a storage solution that covers those peaks, and what could we enable, perhaps through AI and solutions that'll say, hey, maybe we don't, you know, economically we could share some of the wealth here and say to customers, shut down your industrial facility during these hours. I'll pay you a lot of money, and it's a wealth transfer from the data economy customer to these traditional customers not to operate in those periods of time. And I think
you see that scarcity generating that sort of business model.
Oh, there's no doubt, man. Look, these chips are so expensive, and the depreciation schedule is, if you kind of pull it all together, for every hour they're not running one of these chips, if I want to convert that to dollars per megawatt hour, it's $500 or $600. I could get somebody quite easily for $500 or $600 to pay them not to run their facility. They'll do that for $100, $200. Somebody will shut down their production lines not to operate, so the data economy customer can continue to operate. But the social license here for the data economy, if I were to tell you where you are, it's early innings, but you're losing. You're at best tied. A few years ago, everybody wanted the data centers. Why not? Free construction, no employees, great tax base, no strain on the local schools or roadways, right? That was the pitch, and it was selling. And today, as I talk to governors, they still want it, but these concerns about the pricing impacts, just search the web. You'll find the articles readily, are very much apparent, and the true reliability issues are very much apparent. So until this, and the case has got to be better, and I loved what Jensen said, but if I disagree with him, perhaps at the margins it's this, the case has to be better than in the long run, 10 years from now, 20 years, society will be better if we deal with this problem right now. That's not selling, okay? It's not. And so last Friday's decision at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, a number of decisions are going against the industry. That is, what they will do is impose additional costs, but more importantly, cause additional time delays in the deployment of the technology, which, let's face it, is a lot worse than the dollars per megawatt hour stuff we're talking about. You're losing. You got to understand you're losing. We've got to reframe the way we discuss this, and it's got to be more meaningful than an improvement in the relative efficiency of industry or perhaps material benefits or drug benefits that may or may not appear in the next 5 to 10 year period.
Yeah. Jeff, did you have something?
Yeah, I would, the financial aspect of what Joe's describing, the financial markets are pretty disciplined in this regard. I mean, just as a simple example, Joe's talking about peak. Of all of the supply we have in the U.S. right now, we only use all of it 5% of the time, 5 or 6%. That's it. And another 20% is what we call the shoulders, which is probably 80% at capacity. Half the time, we don't use half the power we have in this country. So what's the golden goose? The golden goose is storage, as Joe's talking about. More efficient use of the existing supply. When you think about AI impacting the other end, the demand side, if all of us had smart appliances, all of us charged our Teslas at night when power is free and discharged them during the day, we don't need to build power for a long time to supply the existing needs of the U.S. It's the incremental needs of this data centers where the economics get a little bit confusing. Joe runs nuclear plants where the capital cost is extremely high to build them. The operating cost is extremely low, and they're clean. Major advantage in this market. The opposite end of that, of course, is low capital costs, marginal gas plants where you can build them quicker for less money, but your operating costs are going to be a function of gas prices forever. So the honest true up, for example, for renewables are that they only wind runs 40% of the time, that's it. Yeah. Solar runs in some parts of the country a lot more, but in a lot of parts of the country still half to 2/3. And you have to fully load that cost for storage or something else in order to be competitive in the market. So we just can't go toward that lower cost end without thinking about how it gets used and how we store it and spend it on. So I would say, the marginal cost to all of us for power today is really foggy, right? I mean, if Joe's marginal cost is substantially lower than others, a gas plant, if we build a new gas plant today, it's probably going to be in the $50 to $60 an hour type outcome. A new nuke plant would be $150, but we're not building any. SMRs, everybody's telling me that's the answer. They're still at $1.25. They're 2 or 3 times building marginal gas. So natural gas, whether we like it or not, is going to be the filler fuel for the next 10 years. It's just the way it is. And that's not only in the U.S. Internationally, fossil is going to run a lot longer than we want it to. And AI and data centers are just going to make that stress that much more difficult to achieve.
Yeah, and it feels like, we're in between this, I'll say, just unabashed enthusiasm around what can happen and what's going to happen. We're even from, I'd say, a business perspective, the context of your use cases, thinking about, okay, what are the practical ways to get there? What are the steps we're not going to invent it necessarily overnight, but it's going to move quickly through it. Massive opportunity. I mean, massive opportunity for disruption to be a part of what's being played out here. And Aidan, I wonder, as you think about the capital you're creating, deploying out there, we talked about the small nuclear reactors. We talked about even better versions, safer versions of nuclear and clean energy. How do you think about those things? Where are your mind's eye most keenly pointed today? And are there ideas you're betting on in the future?
Oh yeah, betting everything. I hope it works. But I would say
Aidan will be around afterwards for anyone who's interested in giving capital.
I think there's a really some of the stuff that Jeff and Joe just said. I think to just help thread the needle as well is capital. For us is we use our own money, so we don't have that much, right? And next thing you hear about billions and trillions and zillions. The gap between origination and capital is widening. So the skills are more important that you need than the capital. So, and I think we have a shortage of those skills. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is because I think over time we're not going to have a problem with power. But I think what's happening now is the competition for the next kilowatt of power is massively intense. Yeah. So I think, to Joe's point, he's dealing with today, everyone wants it today. They say, I want 3 gigawatts, but what does that really mean? It means they want 150 megawatts in 4 years. So like you have a 4-year window where you can sit with them and say, all right, if you want the 150 megawatts in 4 years to get started and we have a load ramp to get there, this is what I need you to do for me and my community. So I think that the shift that has to happen is that there's massive amounts of capital looking to invest in this space, and that's going to continue. But I think we have to think about business models a little bit differently. Like I think the opportunity with AI is to have new economic models, new incentive models. And like, look, we started our business, was like we don't even have a website barely. Like because a farmer doesn't care, right? So I think that the gap between people who have the capital and the decision making and the people who have the pain needs to shorten. And I think we need to work together. And so one of the things we're doing is in every market we're working in, we're creating an AI alliance in the market. So we're creating a nonprofit facility to allow all the stakeholders to just align with their needs. Then we go with those needs to the government and we help the hyperscalers get what they want done. And I think it's just, we got to be more practical about what's possible. And then secondly, I would say, we were kind of untethered by experience. So I couldn't spell a megawatt a few years ago. I didn't know anything about it. And that has led us to not, like the stuff we've done turns out was really difficult. But I think not being tethered by what's happened in the last 20 years is also really important. So I think there's a big opportunity for any market that you're in that's an energy hub to really go deeper with universities today and start to say, if this is a talent problem too, like we've got to get the right people coming out with the right skills. And the opportunity with AI to do that is just like the marginal, like they say Rome wasn't built in a day, but whatever it could be. So I think the gap between the people who are actually executing in AI, who are the real brains that you need to look at the energy problem, that's what we got to bridge. And like that's literally what we do. But I think it's the decision makers are just too far apart right now.
Yeah.
But it's an incredible opportunity.
And it feels like part of that decision making in this as well is regulatory related, and in terms of what we can do and can't do. And I would say we talked about the example yesterday. You've got China, who, depending on what you believe, is turning on a nuclear plant every month or every other month at this point, to feed these farms and these processing pieces. Could you talk a little bit, just to the panel, I'll open it up to the group, on just the imperative that we have from, call it a sovereign perspective or a national perspective around being able to provide best-in-class development of these models to impact and influence humanity?
Because we're not original, I'll start off. We'll probably walk down the thing here, but I told you it's early innings and you're losing the argument. Let me tell you what I think the winning argument is, but it is the nature of sometimes these conferences that we go to some of the most beautiful places on the planet, and then somebody like me gets up on the stage and drops the turd in the punch bowl and kind of ruins the experience. So Jim, I apologize if I do that here in my comments, but look, I think when you think about the implications of this technology, the parallels to the Manhattan Project are fairly robust, both from a national security perspective, whether that be cyber threats or more physical threats. The deployment of the technology in military terms is something that policymakers are focused on at different levels. The economic efficiencies for our economy are self-evident, but as I said, I don't know that that's driving it. I do believe this. I made this observation at dinner to Jim last night. I believe this is 1939, and I believe the country is on a bit of a war footing. I think Xi in China fully understands this. I don't think the discussion around the relative sovereignty of Taiwan and the threats that the Chinese military has made to Taiwan are completely unrelated to the fact that that is where chips are being manufactured that are vital to this technology. And I think that all should be read within the fabric of this broader geopolitical situation. I don't think most Americans yet understand it. They understand it in some sort of limited sense. Their fear of the technology is because whatever, 2001: A Space Odyssey, all the way to the Matrix and Terminator movies and that sort of thing. So they get it. But there's not general alignment, and certainly not universally shared among state regulators or policymakers and federal regulators and policymakers, that this is not a discretionary activity. That U.S. leadership here isn't a question of whether we should. The question is whether the U.S. could maintain its democracy and its relative place in the world if it doesn't lead in this technology, if other bad actors get it first. What does that mean about the very foundation of our freedoms? That's a winning argument. It's a scary argument to make, but I think in truth, that's where we are as a country. We have to lead. And we could talk all we want about the export of these chips to the Middle East and other places, but I think that's going to lie in great tension with the fear of many U.S. policymakers that they don't want to export this technology. So the notion that we will go train data centers in the Middle East and import back the learnings on USB sticks, I think is a strained one. I think the reality is no one is going to let you move the data over there from a sovereignty perspective or the chips to make that happen. So the game is here, the game is now, the game must be won, and yet I'm not sure we fully embrace that. And it's a hard thing to talk about. It's not like what you bring people here and they want to, oh yeah, this is great. But I think that's the fundamental truth of it. And I may be extreme in this regard, but I think within 24 months, unfortunately, my sentiment, I think a sentiment that's shared by many of you in the audience, will prove true. And we will come to realize the importance of this moment. We will also come to reflect back on the 24 months that is behind us with either pride that we acted quickly and tried to solve these problems, or with deep regret that we squandered time and on something where the stakes are far too high to squander even a second. Yeah. So that's where I think we are. That's what I think leadership is going to mean. I don't think, just one last word on it, Aidan and I were talking that Jensen's job has evolved from being a tech creator, which he still very much is, to a guy who's flying around the world talking to heads of states. That's about this, right? Mm-hmm. That's about these geopolitical issues. That's about these other things. The guy who was the leader in this space is less a technical person right now than a policy-making person and trying to fill that gap in for the industry. So it's quite an interesting evolution for him in his own schedule, and I think is an indicator to us, illustrative, frankly, to us of what we must do as an industry. Combination of energy people who are not great visionaries with all of you and many of you in the room who are, but trying to weave together a narrative that makes sense so that we have a cohesive approach to doing what I think we must as a country.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for sharing that. I know something you're very passionate about, and something, if I'm channeling the audience here in the room, something I know we'll unpack a bit more here this morning is how we think about that in terms of the security landscape, the cyber threats, the advanced persistent threats that are going on, and ultimately, the collection of that data for the purposes of evil. I mean, for the purposes of disrupting economies. But Jeff or Aidan?
Yeah, I would just, I would maybe be a little more aggressive than Aidan on. I think this is a major league horse race, and I view it from the capital markets perspective that says, if you all are paying $40 a megawatt hour for power right now, and I can sell that power to a hyperscaler or to one of the Magnificent Seven for $150 an hour, I'm going to sell it to $150 an hour. And so it's not going to, we don't have 4 or 5 years to rejigger who actually generates and buys a lot of this power.
You believe the demand's strong enough to dictate that change sooner?
One of Jensen's big themes was, don't make this too complicated. We are manufacturing intelligence in AI. Every manufacturing business in my 40 years of doing this gravitates toward the least cost producer with the least amount of disruption to produce the product. And he fully admits he's flying around the world because we're not doing enough right now in the US, right? He can build a supercomputer for a lot less regulatory headache, a lot less money, in a lot of other places. Albeit, to Joe's point, we've got to have the overall good of the country, our protection, our defense as part of that. But I think this thing is won or lost in the next 5 years as to who this is going to be a big boy business. Aidan's group will keep making a lot of money, venture-like.
Finally, like I am a big boy.
You are a big
Finally, finally something I can do.
Yeah, we're going to make you a big boy. And but I don't think at the end of the day, I really don't believe that the power industry is the one that survives this as the major player. It's going to be the end user hyperscaler Mag 7 because they're just 10 times bigger.
Scale.
They're willing to commit for 10 or 20 years. There isn't a power player in the world committing for 10 or 20 years, right? And so the proximity of the race to me is critical. And it may be less efficient technology, it may cost more, but once I get scale and once I get the market position I need, pricing becomes my problem, not the suppliers. And so there are 10 proposals on my desk for 50 megawatt data facilities, for the next 20 years from everybody. And there's going to be a sorting process. And I think the financial aspects, albeit as crude as it is going to determine the winner.
I totally agree with you, but I think that the demand's not the problem. We're in the middle of the demand. The supply is the problem. I actually think the power's gone. So it's a physics issue, not a supply issue. Like the people we're working with, it's almost uncomfortable, the demand that we're dealing with across all of our businesses. But the supply is like a big issue because you just can't, let's assume we're working with lots of utilities who have the ability to move, but it just takes time. So I think that's what we call it the big squeeze. I think I think people can't even imagine how difficult it's going to get. It's going to end up, I couldn't agree more, the hyperscalers are going to be basically integrated. Like in the past, the last 20, 30 years, all of these technology companies were software companies. And in the future, they're going to be infrastructure businesses. That's really what's happening. And we're in the middle of that shift right now. But, infrastructure, it just takes time to build. That's not even getting into, so one of the people that came on board with us came from Google. And he said they had a massive data center project. And he said they sent out 5 proposals for electrical contractors. And one kind of responded. Kinda. They said, I'll look at it when I get to it in a year. So I think, the transformer issues, the power issues, and eventually the chip issues, it's going to take time for that to filter through. The bigger issue we're seeing is at the same time you're going to have the electrification of everything. So at the same time you're going to have a huge push into the grid that's never happened in human history. So it's going to be interesting, and I think if capital could solve it, it would be great. But I don't think it's going to be enough.
Very good. Well, we're going to open it up for questions to the group here. I'll share just a couple observations from listening. I think the first, Jeff, you hung around long enough. Energy is cool again. You're back in.
Leather jacket, and I'm good.
I'm proud of you, brother. Yeah, you stuck it out. It is back to vogue. Front page stuff here in this. With what's going on. The rest of you, get used to turning your air conditioners down, and Joe's going to send you a check when you do that, is kind of what I heard there. But we'll open it up for questions. We've got about...
Real quick, Joe, just maybe you can share with everybody, why should we be comfortable with nuke? Why should we be comfortable with nuke? If you think about, people were scared about, things that have happened in the past, but it may be the most efficient, cost-effective energy that is out there today.
Right.
Put us at rest. Why you think that?
Well, I'll give that a shot. Look, we've had 3 big incidents in the international nuclear business. We had 3 Mile Island, right? Not the reactor we're restarting, incidentally. The other reactor that'll never restart. It's being chopped up as we speak. That didn't, at the end of the day, produce any fatalities, but it stalled the nuclear industry. To us, it was also the place of rebirth of the industry. So much attention made to what happened, and the performance of the fleet since then has been quite exceptional. We had Chernobyl, where the Russians deliberately took a machine out of its operating parameters for reasons that only they could explain, but no containment vessel, and that was a horrible incident. And then we had Fukushima, right, where we had a simultaneous massive earthquake, and then the following tidal wave that crushed the equipment. All of those have their own little story. Most of our fleet is kind of in the middle of the country, so if we have a tidal wave, presumably we have bigger problems than nuclear. But look, Jim, the World Health Organization measures all of the technologies. Nuclear is tied with solar for the safest technology. We have had more people fall off roofs and die installing solar panels than we've lost in the entirety of the civilian nuclear industry here in the U.S. So it's been exceptional, but when things go wrong, they go wrong pretty badly. One of the things that I think will give us great comfort is I think it will not be 5 or 6 or 7 years from now where we'll have advanced technology fuels in the reactors. Essentially think about a coating around the uranium pellets that would prevent the meltdowns that created all three of the situations we've talked about. For a class of Americans, or perhaps an age group of Americans, there is a bias that is almost irreversible on a subset against the technology. What we've seen is younger people have become a lot more comfortable with the technology. Interestingly, the folks in the tech industry have been leaders in that regard, and probably, Jim, because teenagers, they don't know what 3 Mile Island is, right? Any more than they know anything else these days. So they're getting more comfortable. I think we have operated extremely well. I think we've learned a lot of good lessons, and I think the fuels and all of the technology in the plants is far better than when we first built it. But you earn that every single day, right? And so I think that's probably the real answer here. I think for the first time we're seeing nuclear pull better than, for example, offshore wind, which has its own problems. Certainly Trump has not been a fan of wind, and that's biased a subsection of the American body public. But we got to keep working that, but I think we could deliver, and I think we could deliver extremely well. Some of the new designs will, take safety issues, frankly, off the table.
In the great words of Jensen Wang, I hope that's not the last question. Meltdown, really? Yeah. That's how you want to finish? Yeah. One thing I would say, just from people have asked, why are we not building nuclear plants currently in the U.S. where other nations are? And I think it's not a safety issue at all. It's not an operational issue. It's not a technology issue. It's the regulation, safety, siting, permitting. It's a 10-year cycle, and the cost associated with building a new plant today of scale is just so in excess of the cost of building a gas plant or renewable that we just can't justify raising the capital to build them. You agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, no, definitely, Jeff. I mean, look, Jeff has talked a little bit, and thank you for the compliments earlier about our success. Call it an $80 billion market cap company. The last 2 units that were built in America by the Southern Company that were just commissioned, one of them months ago, cost probably $35 to $40 billion, took 10 years to build. So we're the third, fourth maybe, largest by market capitalization energy company in America. From an electric supply standpoint, and half of our market cap would have to go into the infrastructure to build 2 more units. And within my existing market cap, I already own 25, a bunch of hydro, a bunch of renewables, and so the costs are staggering.
Average life of the power assets that you own has got to be 25 years?
Yeah, easily.
I mean, nobody runs big industrial businesses, really. It's old school industrial capital. that, is still going to be the front edge of the technology. It's ironic in so many ways.
So look, when you say the amount of dough you need to make this thing scale up is dough that doesn't exist in all of the market capitalization of all of our companies, exactly right. It's got to come from a different place.
It's coming from somewhere else.
Very good, thank you. We'll do one more question.
The meltdown scared him off.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Jeff, I'll stand up. 6 years ago, I joined a gaming company that's done pretty well. That was about $3.5 trillion of market cap. You said 10 years, you see natural gas being that gap fuel. A couple of years ago, I think it was around $8 per, is it BTU hour, whatever the metric is.
Yeah.
Can you speak to what you see the commodity prices doing with natural gas over the next few years, if that is truly the gap fuel?
Yeah, sure. I'll start, and I'm sure Joe's got a view too. I mean, the entire marginal pricing curves in these markets are generated off price per MMBTU. We see just an incredibly large supply of natural gas. It's transporting it around that's more difficult to where it needs to get to than it is getting it out of the ground. We have gas still in the low threes, mid threes, $3 per MMBTU for the foreseeable future. Geopolitical disruptions, it bounces around a little bit, but we're making a lot of LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, which will supplement some of the pure natural gas. So it's been a long time since we've had bumps where it hits $8, but it's been a decade since we've had really high sustainable gas prices. So we can still, as I said before, generate a new gas plant with natural gas at the margin that's very competitive today to current prices. And we see it that way for several years.
Yeah, just to supplement it, I don't think what we're talking about on this stage is lost in the market. They understand consumptive uses of natural gas will go on. It's a fairly liquid market. We could go out and look at 5 years. We could go out and buy 5 or 10-year strips of gas. And so that might be trading at $4 or north of $4 at some point, so roughly a doubling of the prices we're at right now, but those are historic lows, and they're not going to change the game. Honestly, the bigger thing is, as Jeff said, is probably the only thing that is harder and takes longer than building a nuclear plant, maybe 2, 3 things, or as we say in New Jersey, a couple, 3 things. Offshore wind, big transmission lines, nobody wants to build them. They're painful to build, and interstate gas pipelines, which become all of, these protracted court battles that often go on for a decade or better.
We have another question. Extremely
I
upbeat.
need to take a shot at my friend, Mr. Holzschuh, the big shoe. No, that is not. We great friends. I love the guy. Well, I am coming back at him. No, this is a serious question. So bringing this kind of all back together around AI, with what you guys, first of all, incredible panel. I mean, just really the insights you guys bring is just truly amazing. So thank you guys very much. But bringing it back to AI, if you think about the hyperscalers that you all talked about, Jeff, you talked about you got 20, 30 deals on your desk about people wanting, big investors, private equity funds, venture funds, you name it, wanting to invest. Joe and Aidan, what you guys are seeing in different areas. I think one of the telling signs is that you have the hyperscalers, and the hyperscalers, by the way, anybody that's worked with the hyperscalers, they don't pay over market for anything. They get the best price and everything that they go, and they will negotiate, and we know that by experience. However, they are willing today to go out and buy energy where they can and futures and pay a premium to guarantee that they have access to that power. Maybe just because from my perspective, it's such a validation with the amount of money that's going into, and the reason they're doing it is they just don't want energy. they want the capacity to drive AI capabilities, large language models. So what are you guys seeing just at a high level, and how is that different? I mean, changing the industry that you're in, the demand out there.
Well, for us, look, not just restarting TMI, but we have an agreement with Microsoft to advance fusion research technology. A lot of the gas companies are doing sequestration technology with the hyperscalers. I think it is about a couple things, Jim. I think it is about securing that future of energy, but I think to a great extent it is about social license. It is about the ability to use the existing energy infrastructure today that they understand that they're using a big chunk of, but also trying to demonstrate to America, citizens, policymakers, that they are leading the charge and that eventually in the fullness of time, these other technologies will be there that'll help us address the climate crisis and also power this. So I think it is about future planning, but I wouldn't lose sight of the importance, just as the importance of the narrative I shared moments ago with you, but the social license we all need, including WWT, to demonstrate the capabilities of these technologies to solve the very energy problems that we've been talking about on the stage. People need to see that happen, right, for them to believe in it. They need to see the future of investment in new nuclear and other technologies to allow these companies to use the existing nuclear, existing gas, and other things. Gas could be a bridge, right? But they don't want it to be a bridge forever. They need to see the land on the other side. That's what these folks are trying to do.
Yeah, I think you got to remember, Jim, that power infrastructure in this country was built primarily on a regulated basis. So the way it would work is you'd assess your service territory, figure out how much it was going to grow over the next 10 or 20 years, how much industrial load, how much retail load, and you'd propose to the regulators to build a big fossil or nuclear plant to serve that load for the next 30 years. By definition, you were wrong because you're projecting, so you either had more supply than you needed or less, and there was always a big political fight. What's really changing now are guys like Joe and independent, non-regulated producers, including the hyperscalers and the big seven. They're not going to go through a 3-year planning process, a 2-year permit. They're just going to go. They're going to throw capital at it, and the first guy to build it safely and on time is getting the contract. I would argue, and I'm not a tech guy, but every single time we've looked back in history at the internet adoption, mobile phone, and cloud, we've underestimated by a factor of 5 the amount of power that was going to need to supply this. So if we're wrong, we're going to be wrong on that side, would be my guess. And so I think the change is we're going to have an entrepreneurial energy business over the next 25 years, not a fully regulated, really slow to build, slow to change group of, and if any of my clients are here, I apologize, but it does not move fast in that space.
Yeah. No.
Here, by the way. Yeah, I think to the point about underestimating the cycle, I think when Netscape came out, there's only 2% of the total market cap that got created in the internet was created at that time. So I think the thing people are going to struggle with is actually the speed of change of this cycle is like nothing. I mean, it's extremely uncomfortable, even though we're one of the beneficiaries. So it's like a new problem, you know. I would say I think the independent power producer side is and people reimagining how power gets created and used using AI is absolutely going to happen. And it's a really great opportunity. Like we're seeing it in real time. Like, you know, it's amazing to see people who are, you know, we say there's 2 types of people you need in a company. You need pirates and you need scientists. Pirates know where the treasure is and they give you a treasure map, and scientists make sure you got all the data, information, and systems. In utilities, you've got a lot of scientists, and we've got loads of pirates. So when we sit down and we sit down with someone who's been like an engineer for like 15, 20 years and knows the power infrastructure inside out, we say, hey, to Joe's point about showing them the possibilities, we literally build and demo and show them exactly what we could do, and we can create a company in 4 weeks that could allow them, you know, with the same relationships move forward. It's like a new paradigm. So I'm very, very excited about like the possibilities, and it's legislation over regulation. Like I think it's just make sure that nobody does any harm, and that the community is at the forefront of how people decide.
Yeah. Very good. Well, I'll sum it up here to say I think the leading indicator of the largest companies, best funded, pretty intelligent organizations that are chasing after this scarce resource should get us thinking about who we're partnering with, how we're partnering, because the GPU is one element of it, the power, the facilities, the critical facilities, and then whether you're a Fortune 50, a nation state, country that's looking at this, critically important that those two things are stitched together. I want to thank our panelists for their thoughts and input here on this. Thank you, guys. Yeah.